Welcome to another edition of Dead or Alive in the Somerville Film Group. Today we have the lovely Leslie Barnett from Barnett Wellness Consulting. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So one of the reasons why we are here today is you are a health coach.
Yes. And I like to refer to myself as a health enthusiast and educator.
And you're also doing work with Betsy Bragg, who has a course called Eat to Thrive.
Yes.
Which is fabulous. I took it 9 years ago, and she teaches people an organic lifestyle. So let's get right to it. You're going to tell us about food combining. That's one of your specialties, amongst many other things.
Right.
So why don't you take us on a journey, because you really know where it all begins.
All right, that sounds terrific, JoJo. I'd really like to start out with just a little bit of information about my journey. First of all, I am a holistic health coach, and I was certified through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York City in 2008. And I started a health consulting practice back then, but was saddled with Lyme disease. And so it really kind of derailed my work in that area. And one of my quests truly is to understand the nature of health and healing. And that's been my mission through all of this work, how I was able to recover, and then how other people recover from their illnesses as well, and why some people have more challenges. So I was able to recover in my journey from both Lyme disease and depression. And then I also witnessed my daughter recover from Lyme disease after she had gone through the conventional approach using antibiotics. How she was able to recover, JoJo, was by going to the Hippocrates Health Institute in Florida. She had been sick with Lyme disease, and in her college years, went on antibiotics. She did have some recovery, but then relapsed. When she relapsed, we decided not to take the conventional approach, but to actually try a very holistic, natural approach in her healing journey. We sent her to Hippocrates Health Institute in Florida, which is the educational institute that Betsy trained at to become a whole food, raw, living food health educator. My daughter recovered at Hippocrates Health Institute from Lyme disease. And my question was always, what was it about that program that enabled her to recover? What really happened there? What were the triggers that allowed her body to heal from this very serious illness? So when I was exploring that question, JoJo, I stumbled upon the work of a doctor named Dr. Jerry Tennant. And Dr. Tennant was a famous eye surgeon who invented LASIK surgery. And he became very ill after performing one of his surgeries with a brain infection. He was sick for over 6 years. And he had to learn how to heal himself because because he was having trouble finding answers through the conventional approaches. So one discovery that he made is that voltage is incredibly important for our healing process. The way we measure our voltage, JoJo, is on the pH scale. So many of us have heard about our pH, and what it is a measure of how alkaline or how acidic our bodies are. Now, we are mostly water. Our bodies are about 70% water. When we measure the voltage of a solution is basically a liquid. We measure it, we can get the voltage using a millivolt, but it's also the same thing as measuring the pH. So the more alkaline a solution is, the lower the pH, not to get too complicated right now, but the more voltage that solution is able to carry. When the pH of that solution is very acidic, it doesn't carry any voltage at all. So when you think about our bodies as mostly water, that's a solution. And when our pH is acidic, we don't have that voltage. When our pH is more alkaline, we have voltage to heal. This is the discovery that I learned from Dr. Jerry Tennant, and it's such an important discovery because it really is the foundation of health and healing. And I get so excited when I share this information with others because it gives a real framework for how to think about health and healing from this voltage standpoint. So going back to my daughter at Hippocrates, what they were doing there, JoJo, is everything that they did was geared towards increasing this voltage in her body. So they not only had the green drinks every day, they had a super alkaline, high mineral diet, which boosts the minerals and pH in the body with all the sprouts, the green drinks in the afternoon. And then also the thing I loved about the Institute is they did a lot of other therapies that really reduced stress and connected all the clients there with relaxation techniques and understanding their body. And it was just such a holistic approach that really helps with the voltage as well. So when we're overly stressed or not connected with our purpose, our voltage actually gets depleted too. So those are really important. It's not just food, which is important for the mineral content, but we've got to think our voltage from this energetic standpoint, which are things like toxic relationships, not being connected to work, and our energetic field around us, that we need to be fed voltage from those aspects of our life as well.
I don't know if this is going off topic, but when people are stressed, sometimes they crave salt. Does the salt help the voltage?
That's exactly the connection. So what you're finding there is, yes, minerals is what helps boost the alkalinity and voltage in our body. So it makes sense that salt is a mineral that creates, if you were to just take a solution and you were to add salt to it, you're making it more alkaline, which is boosting the voltage of that solution. So
oh my goodness.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Okay, so I was told to drink a glass of lemon water, a glass of water and put some fresh squeezed lemon juice, but put a little bit of salt.
Exactly. So you're not only getting the minerals from the lemon juice itself, but also it's kind of complemented by the salt that you're putting in with the extra minerals to make this energetic exchange happen within our cellular structure.
Oh, I like that. The energetic. Did you hear that? Energetic exchange. Yeah, this is great stuff.
So it is, but going back, it's really important. I think people really need to understand this voltage concept. So what we're doing, going back to this concept of food combining, is that we're always thinking about how we can promote energy. So one of the ways that we can maximize the energy in our body is with food combining. And often we can think about food combining from a kind of an intellectual standpoint. And this is the more traditional way that we think about food combining. That it has been presented historically is by focusing on the macronutrients of the foods that we are eating. So you ask, what are the macronutrients? Well, we've heard there are macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients are the terms that we're all familiar with, and that's proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And these are the nutrients that really are the foundation of our nutrition, okay? But when we go beyond that, the other most important nutrients are the micronutrients. And these are all the little nutrients that are the phytonutrients, the things that we find in plants that we need in these micro amounts that are absolutely critical, again, for our voltage and for the healing processes in our body and functioning in the cells.
Wow, this is exciting. So this changes our whole view on food.
Yes, it does. So we'll go back a little bit. I think one of the first things that I want to discuss that's really important for everybody to understand is just how the digestive system works.
Oh yes, please do.
Okay, very, very briefly, because we don't need to be too complex about it. What happens when we start digesting our food? People are often surprised to hear that we start digesting our food when we actually see it and smell it. So it hasn't even come into our system yet, but that recognition, our eyes and our nose are receptors, and they're actually preparing our body to begin the digestive process. So you know that when you smell something that tastes really good, your saliva glands might start generating saliva, or you see something. That's when the digestion process actually begins. So then we'll actually take our first bite, and as we chew our food, a long word for that is called mastication, but when we chew our food, the saliva starts mixing with it, and that is the second step in the digestive process, actually. We swallow with our food, and it begins to travel down our esophagus and into our stomach. When we start chewing our food with the saliva, there are enzymes in our saliva that are really important for digesting carbohydrates. This is where a lot of the digestion of carbohydrates happen. And the carbohydrates are really what get converted into sugars eventually and supply our body with energy. And I'll be talking more about carbohydrates later. So once the food goes down, it's broken up a little bit by our teeth and the saliva. It goes down our esophagus into our stomach. It's then mixed there with more enzymes, bile and acids that are starting to break down the other components, the macronutrients of our food, which are the fats and the proteins. Once it gets all mixed there, it gets transported into the small intestines, where the main mission is to start absorbing the nutrients through tiny little hairs all along the small intestine, so that it's absorbed into our bloodstream and then put to work for all the body functions, whether it's building muscle and tissue, repairing tissue, providing energy for the cells, or even supporting the cellular membranes with the fats. Then it moves into the large intestine for elimination. That's basically it. Mouth, esophagus, the stomach, breaking it apart, the small intestine, the large intestine, and elimination. Really, really simple, but it's important to understand that.
Are there certain types of food for certain types of body types of blood? Are there certain types of foods that people should eat with each other foods? Because let's face it, our ancestors long, long ago, they would have one food at a time.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that question, that concept. So one thing that, let's think about some meals that we have, right? So Thanksgiving dinner is an ideal example.
Oh my God.
It is the one meal where the focus so much is on the food. And that's one of the most, I think, the best example of the extreme end of what food combining, the epitome of what it shouldn't be. You're combining so many different kinds of foods. You're combining heavy proteins, which are the meats. You're incorporating starches, which is in the stuffing and the mashed potato and the squash. You might have some salad and some green beans. You're going to have a lot of fat with all the butter in there. And what's the feeling you have after Thanksgiving?
You just want to go to sleep.
Go to sleep.
You're exhausted because your digestion system just says, wait a minute, slow down.
Yeah.
I have to digest, and then people just get exhausted because the body's like killing itself to digest all this food that we didn't need.
Exactly. So that's a perfect example of how much energy is taken to digest a really complex meal. One thing that our ancestors did was have things that are called mono meals. And a mono meal would be where you're just eating one type of food. So, and this is something that could go along the lines of almost more of a therapeutic approach to food combining. So it's not something that I recommend. But if you were to be really in a health challenged situation where you really need a lot of energy to heal yourself from some chronic illness or disease, you may want to consider an approach like a mono meal, where you're just eating one thing. You could have a lunch of just artichokes, steamed artichokes with a little bit of Bragg's amino.
I've done that, and I love it.
So yes, and it's very easy. Your body is recognizing, oh, this is one vegetable. I like this. It's very easy for me to digest. It's very healing food. And you move through it. You're not complicating it overly with, you can put a little bit of fat. And as a matter of fact, some healthy oil with it can actually help your body absorb more of the nutrients.
I do that. I have the steamed artichokes. In my Instant Pot, I have a little bit of grass-fed butter, and I have the avocado mayonnaise, a little bit. It it agrees with me.
Yes.
So that's a good thing.
That's a beautiful thing. So
Oh,
just know you've got this
yes.
confidence that
Nice.
to understand why that's good for you, why that's okay to do. And you get energy. So having a banana, for example, just fantastic. It's going to easy to digest. You're absorbing all those nutrients, loaded with micronutrients. It's got some complex sugars in it, and you feel great. You're not combining it with, say, lots of starches, maybe throwing a banana in with oatmeal, and then you're adding some cranberries and maybe some walnuts, and you'll throw in some butter. That ends up making that meal very complicated. You can see the difference.
Right.
So what you might want to do is just have a banana. Let your body digest that.
For how long?
Oh, it could be 20 minutes, a half an hour or so. Fruit digests very quickly. You begin to break it down very quickly in the saliva in your mouth. It goes through. It's easy. Most of the digestion happens in that process through the saliva, believe it or not. So the nutrients are very easily absorbed. It goes through your stomach and then out. It moves through quickly. The foods that don't move through quite so quickly are the proteins and the fats.
Is it better to have fruits before?
So the concept I think most important with fruits is typically to have them alone or before the meal. Or a couple of hours after the meal. The reason is that fruits are really loaded with highly available sugar. Okay, they're not a complex carbohydrate like you might find in other starchier vegetables. And even, starchy, I was going to say starchier fruits, but I will talk a little bit more about that. But definitely fruits, because of their sugar content, should be eaten mostly alone. And the reason is that when you put sugar with other things, they ferment. It's a common thing to know about chemistry and biology.
Sure.
So the other thing that I really want to talk about, JoJo, is that it can be really complicated. If you were to Google, say, for example, food combining, how to best food combine, what you would come up with is very complicated charts with maybe a triangle with protein in it, a triangle with different kinds of starches and sugars, and another one, and there'd be arrows of this and to do that. And it turns out to be very complicated, because really what are proteins, what are carbohydrates? Those in and of themselves are very complicated terms for people to understand. The best way that, what the information I want to share about that, JoJo, is that everything has a combination of these macronutrients. So when you say, for example, look at a nut, people say, oh, nuts are proteins. That's not necessarily true. They're protein, they're fat, and they have some fiber in it. Okay?
Oh.
And a little bit of carbohydrates, but there's a combination of all three of those in every single food. And the reason why people say, well, that's a carb, it's the dominant macronutrient in that food. So the dominant macronutrient in a nut maybe is protein, but it's actually equal protein and fat depending on the nuts. And even nuts like macadamia nuts have more fat than protein. Almonds, I'm not sure exactly. I don't, have this exact ingredient percentages, but it's a little bit more equal in protein to fat in an almond, and that's one of the reasons why almonds are encouraged as a healthy nut to consume. But all nuts are in general. Friday.
I was at an event this morning at 6:30 a.m. There was bagels. There was little desserts. There was fruit. I said, everything here breaks down into sugar. So if someone eats a bagel, which I probably might have one a year, if even that, what is a bagel? Is it grain or is it sugar?
So that's a really good question too, because so many people, so I just talked a little bit about protein, but then we get into the whole realm of carbohydrates and what they really are. People will often say there was a trend, oh, I'm low carb diet, I don't eat any carbs. Quote unquote, for most people that meant I'm staying away from bread, bagels, baked goods and that. But when you think about it, the other thing that I learned when I was at the Hippocrates Health Institute is that all vegetables are carbohydrates.
You talk about the energy of food. I looked at the food and I asked the food, are you going to serve me?
I love that, JoJo. I really do. That's a really great question.
Are you going to serve me today? to be the best that I can possibly be, and the food says, no, not today.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a really great question, and I think for the audience, it's a great thing to ask as well. I really do.
What would you tell the audience if they had to, have this relationship with food? What would you say to them?
I love that. So JoJo, the other thing this is a really fun way to think about food combining. And we mentioned it a little bit before, but it's thinking about the energetics of food. And it's not a term that's really widely thought about when we think about food. But if you were to look at your food from this different standpoint of energy, I'll give you a few examples, and that will give you some idea as to how to think about the energetics of food. Let's look at potatoes, or foods that are grown in the ground. These are called root vegetables. When you think about all the vegetables that come from the ground, say carrots, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, parsnips, radishes, these, when you even just look at them, they're grown under the ground, and in and of themselves, their energy is very grounding. So they're very dense. There's a lower water content. They're loaded with fiber. They've got like some nice color to it. So if you find at times when you're feeling very flighty or having difficulty concentrating, it might be that your body's telling you need more grounding foods. These are the types of foods that really might help you. So from an energetic standpoint, they're, maybe from a Chinese medicine standpoint, they're kind of yang foods. They're more contracted and dense with their energy. Then we'll go the next level up, and let's think about foods that are grown right on the ground. So this might be things like strawberries or asparagus, and things that are vine foods like squashes and melons. These are foods that are a little bit they're grounding, but they are above the ground, and they've got a little more moisture, a little bit less density to them. So they're more balancing foods. We'll go the next level up and think about foods that are grown on vines and bushes. So these might be things like blueberries and green beans, tomatoes, broccoli. They're maybe 2 feet to 4 feet in the air. Again, these foods are very, very balancing for us. And if you look at this yin to yang scale, when you think about yang being very grounded and contracted, we're kind of moving up that spectrum towards the yin scale, where you might find that these foods have more energy in them. So you can see that when you're thinking about berries, blueberries that are grown on bushes, or the green beans and the broccoli, these tend to be less dense and carry more energy in them. The most yin foods are those that are grown in the tall trees. So you're looking at your peaches, your apples, your pears, your oranges, tangerines. When you think about eating these foods, it just makes sense that they're bringing you so much energy because there's a high water content loaded with micronutrients and just lots of sugars in those foods that bring us really good energy for our body. So it's a very different way of looking at our food, is from this energetic standpoint. And JoJo,
Coconuts.
And coconuts are high.
They're the highest.
Pineapple. Think about pineapples and how much energy is in pineapple, and the juiciness of a fresh pear, fresh pineapples, just loaded with concentrated energy and sugar. And so again, we're not looking at judgment here. We're looking at the nature and the beauty of these foods and what they're offering us from that, from this energetic point of view. So you've got the density of the grounded root vegetables all the way up to those really juicy, wonderful, sugary, sweet vegetables.
Right.
At times when you're feeling really down in the dumps and low and just can't get yourself moving, guess what? You might want to have some of those really energizing sweet foods. And we're going to take it away a little bit from that concept that all really sweet, sugary foods are not healthy for you. Everything is on a spectrum, and everything in balance is important to think about foods that way, but just to not overdo. There may be at times when your body needs just a little bit of that boost of energy that's in those foods. And also, you've got to remember that these are foods from nature. So they've got the phytonutrients from all the beautiful colors in them that are very healing in and of themselves. It's just when you go overboard that it could become a problem for people when they're trying to heal.
So energetically, your body is drawn to a certain food. Oh, I really want that food. That's the time to have it, right?
Yes, depending on where that drive comes from, JoJo, it's really important to separate. You can get that energetic drive from influences that aren't necessarily from your body's natural craving, okay? There is a difference. You could get a craving that's more from a psychological craving, an emotional craving, such as you mentioned before. When you're really like feeling fatigued, you were talking about, well, does my body need more salt? That's kind of a common, that could be your body, more physical craving from your body that you need to listen to. But it's important to really balance out. When you get those cravings for sugar, be really aware of, is that emotional craving to feel a need?
Right. Am I tired? Am I tired?
Yes.
And I just need something to pick me up, or do I really need this?
So JoJo, so you may be inclined to think about, I really want to go for that cookie or brownie, but that's the important time when you say, you know what, I am feeling, I do have that craving for something sweet. What are the things that will give me that, satisfy that sweet craving that's healthy? So you really could go over to a medjool date, loaded with micronutrients.
Right.
You could go to a piece of fruit. You could even go to caramelized onions.
I love caramelized onions. Do they have a lot of sugar?
Well, so they satisfy that need for sweetness.
I see.
So onions do have sugar in them, all foods do, but when you cook them like that, make them caramelized, it's bringing that sweet sugar flavor out. It's almost converting those sugar starches that are in the onion into sugar, so you're receiving it in your body in a different way.
Right.
Isn't that something? But you will appease that craving that way, but it's a healthy food. That's the important thing.
Good.
To make the difference.
Good, nice.
Okay. We covered the digestion process. We covered understanding what foods are in terms of their macronutrients, so knowing that each food has a protein, a carbohydrate, and fat to it.
Right.
And there's one that's more dominant than the other. That's typically the way food combining's been taught.
Right.
But what we presented today is a different way of food combining, to look at the energetics of food, where the food is grown, and just in terms of where it's grown on the earth. The other thing I want to talk about for the energetics of food is nuts, seeds, and grains and legumes. These are really, really concentrated foods, JoJo. It's really important to understand why it's important not to eat too many of these ingredients.
Okay.
Now, people will often think a handful of nuts can be really helpful, but then they'll do that, and maybe a couple of hours later, they'll feel very fatigued. The reason is that when you think about a nut and you're consuming this little item, this little seed, that's going to eventually grow into, say, an almond tree. There's that much concentrated energy in these foods. So whether it's a walnut, a pine nut, an almond, a pecan, you look at this little ingredient from a very different perspective. One of the things in raw and living food lifestyle is that they really encourage you to soak your nuts. And the reason you do that is it releases the energetic forces within these concentrated foods. It's a concentrated food source. It begins to release some of the energetic forces before you consume it. So it's really important to wash and soak your nuts before you eat them. It makes them so much more digestible. And when you do eat these concentrated food sources, it's really important to keep in mind, because they're so concentrated, you may want to eat them in smaller amounts and eat them with other things such as lettuces and things that have a lot of enzymes and water in them to help digest all the nutrients that are in those nuts and seeds. It's a really, really important thing to understand why seeds, nuts, and legumes, You don't want to, it will be very hard and energetically demanding to eat a big bowlful or a handful of those.
That's why people get digestive problems when they have nuts, because they don't soak their nuts.
They don't soak their nuts, and they may eat too many of them, and then often the nuts have been roasted in oils. So yes, nuts, again, we're not on that scale of judgment. Nuts are healthy, but you have to understand this food from an energetic point of view.
What if you buy raw cashews at Trader Joe's? Do you need to soak those?
I recommend that you do soak your nuts and wash them too. Give them a rinse, soak them. You can soak them for only 3-5 hours. It doesn't have to be a long time. Keep a few. So say for example, you'd like to enjoy some cashews. Take out the amount of cashews you'd like to enjoy over the next day or so. Put them in a mason jar. Put some water, rinse them off, soak them, and eat those over the next day. Don't keep soaked nuts for a long time. They will spoil. So just keep that in mind. But if at all possible, you can eat your nuts soaked, it really is the better way to eat them, and then also allows for more energy. Again, we're all talking about how to bring more energy into our bodies. It's the most important thing with eating our food, and efficiency and energy and food combining.
Someone like myself, I like things that are crunchy because I like to feel the crunch. What are other alternatives to nuts besides celery?
Yeah, celery and carrots, cauliflower, crunchy. You could, well, it depends on if you're strictly living food. Are you a strictly living food? Okay.
No.
So you could roast your cauliflower at a high temperature and get a nice charred thing. And little bits of that, you could roast your broccoli at higher temperatures. The trick is getting it in there to get some caramelization, and the caramelization process to happen will satisfy that crunch taste. And you make it into smaller pieces so that if you chop the cauliflower or broccoli, have some larger chunks and some smaller ones, what happens is the smaller pieces get a little bit more charred and crunchy.
Yeah.
And it gives you that nice crunch. And the caramelization is, again, bringing out the sugars and the starches to make it really satisfying.
What do you put on?
Well, you could toss them in just a little bit of olive oil, natural, the best quality olive oil that you have.
Temperature?
So that would be, and temperature, again, a higher temperature, so you could go up to 400 degrees.
Nice.
I think 425. Okay. Experiment. The important thing is experiment 15 minutes. So you're still getting a lot of nutrients, but that can really be a nice, satisfying way to get more vegetables in yourself and have that crunch. The other thing is dehydrated crackers. I love making dehydrated crackers.
I love those. I make, you know what I do? Well, I learned this from Betsy, is the pulp that you have when you juice, I now freeze it, and when I make my dehydrated crackers, I'll use the flaxseed, which I grind up, and the chia seeds and the sesame seeds, black and white, and I'll get the pulp and mix it all in with the coconut aminos, which acts as a salt.
Yes.
And
minerals, yes, great.
And I gotta tell you, the taste is phenomenal.
That's fantastic. It really is. And so you can get your crunch there. And it's easy to make your own dehydrated crackers. If you have a oven and you put it at very low temperature, and what you do is you can blend up, like you said, the pulp from juicing, your soaked sunflower seed, your soaked nuts, blend that all up and then spread it into a pan on some parchment paper with a spatula, bake it, and score it into squares. Bake it, for 3 or 4 hours, extremely low temperature. Really great, healthy way to get some good crunch and good nutrients in it too.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You're just terrific.
Thank you, thank you. One thing I mentioned when I've taught Betsy's class before that I think is really important is whatever people do is to not stress about what they're eating. Stress is, we are, with all the profusion of self-help and wellness information and health and nutrition advice out there, people get so confused and overwhelmed. And one of my missions is to take that confusion away and bring clarity and confidence to people. And one thing that's so important is just to embrace what you're eating, to honor what you're eating, to receive the foods that you are, do the very best you can with your food combining, with your selection, making sure that it is as close to its natural state as possible is the most important thing. And if the majority of your food is that you're eating, that's great. Pat yourself on the back and feel really good about it. And if you find that that at times you aren't eating that way, just don't worry about it. That you'll get back on track the majority of the time if you can make 80 to 90% of your time that you're eating a really wholesome food. You should pat yourself on the back. Just enjoy your company and bless your food. That's really the most important thing, and do the best you can. But don't have fear. Fear is a big factor that really I think can be very damaging energetically to people. And when you feel that food is the most important thing that you're doing to create health, it's only one component. So you have to really pay attention to all the components of your health. And food is just one. And it's so, so important for people to really understand that. Pay attention to the other components that are affecting you energetically, and you'll be really well on your way to feeling healthy and energized and live a vibrant life and fight illness. So that's really important.
Wow, this is fabulous.
JoJo, thank you so much for having me here. It's really been a delight. And one thing I wanted to share with you also is I've developed a very unique approach that's called Reclaim Your Radiance. So many of us feel as though we've lost our radiance due to illnesses or just chronic stress, the environment, the chemicals in our system. And I really feel it's so important for people to know that they can get that radiance back in a very judgment-free approach. It's self-empowering, and with this approach, people gain clarity and confidence to really make those decisions that are right for them. It's really inspiring and really important for people to know that they really can get that radiance back, one step at a time. Thanks so much again, JoJo. It was really great to be here.
You are such a delight, Leslie. Thank you so much. And Betsy's going to be so pleased because you touched upon so many great points. And for folks out there, Betsy has this amazing course called Eat to Thrive, and boy, does she cover so many topics. The mind, the body, the spirit, it's just amazing. And Leslie here is one of the people that she features.
I teach classes. I've taught this food combining class for Betsy, and I also took her 10-week Eat to Thrive course and thought it was just phenomenal.
It is phenomenal.
She does a great job.
Leslie, thank you. Thank you so much. You are so delightful.
Thank
delightful.
you, JoJo.
Thank
really
you.
Glad to be here.
All right, Leslie. Thank you.